Today, we're going to be breaking down the eligibility requirements for a marriage-based green card application. You may be married to a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, and you want to know if you qualify for a marriage-based green card process. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down what those requirements are. And in subsequent videos in this series, I'm going to be going even deeper in each of these requirements. So let's jump right in because there is quite a few things to cover. If this is your first time here, welcome. I am Attorney Lilian Chukwurah. I'm a US-based immigration attorney that have been practicing immigration law for almost 10 years, and I help my clients get their green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the US immigration law system. What we're really here for. Are you eligible for a marriage-based green card? Okay. And that's why you're here today. You want to know what the requirements are in order for you to get a green card through your spouse. We're going to talk about what the requirements are if you're in the US versus if you're outside of the US, because there is a difference in the process. So let's get into it. Now, basic eligibility criteria. Okay, this is the basics. You must be married to a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. Okay, in order for you to go through the marriage green card process, you have to be married. And in order for you to qualify, you need to be married to either a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. Most of the time, it's better to be married to a U.S. citizen because then you are the immediate relative of a U.S. citizen, and there is always a visa available for immediate relatives of U.S. citizens. However, if you're married to a green card holder, a permanent resident, there is a preference category, which means you may have to wait for a visa to become available before you may be able to apply for a green card, either in the US or outside of the US. So it's really important that when you're looking at this criteria, just know, even if your spouse is a green card holder, you can still apply for a marriage-based green card process. It's just your requirements are going to be very different from someone that's married to a US citizen. The next thing is your marriage must be legally recognized. And this means legally recognized where you got married and where you intend to live in the US. Okay, this is very, very important. So for example, if you get married to, let's say, a first cousin, and that is allowed in your country, but it is not allowed in the state you want to live in the US, guess what? USCIS is still going to deny your application, even though your marriage is legally recognized where you got married. So it's really important that as you're going through this process, if there's any, nuances, if there's anything with your marriage that may make it a little unusual or not a typical marriage in the US, you want to be discussing that with your lawyer, because there may be extra steps you have to take to make it possible for you to file the marriage-based green card. The next thing you want to do is prove that your marriage is real. Now you've proven that your marriage is legal and legally recognized. You're married to a U.S. citizen and a permanent resident. You want to prove that your marriage is genuine, meaning it is real. You married this person for love. You did not marry them just so you can get a green card. Okay, that is the most important thing to remember here. It doesn't mean that getting a green card is not part of your plan as a family. It just means that your reason for marrying this person is not only to get a green card. It could be to build a life together in the US, and part of building a life together in the US is to have a green card for you to permanently live in the US. But having a green card cannot be the only reason. You have to actually genuinely want to be married to this person and have a life with this person. And to show that, you want to have pictures, joint bank accounts, leased together, things that show joint ownership of assets, pictures together. You really want to label your pictures because you want to make sure that it is clear to USCIS when the pictures were taken and who is in the pictures, okay? your joint bank account, if you have one, you want to print out your statements. If you add your spouse to your bank account that you already own, you want to make sure you are including a statement from the bank showing exactly when your spouse was added to that bank account. If you have a lease and your spouse was added later on, you also want to get a statement from your landlord showing that your spouse lives there and when they were added to that lease. And then affidavits from friends and family. I will be honest with you. This is kind of the last resort. So if you are not able to have anything else, no pictures, no bank accounts, no statements, I've even forgot to put text messages on this, right? If you're not able to have all of those other things, affidavits from friends and family, which is basically a letter saying that they know you two are married, they know your marriage is real, giving specific examples of their time with you, and how they have personal knowledge of your relationship, right? Not that you told them that your marriage is real and you two love each other, but that they have actually witnessed it firsthand. So that is really important with the affidavits, and I want to just take a minute to make sure that is clear. When it comes to the affidavits, you want to make sure it's coming from people that have firsthand knowledge of you two as a couple. If your spouse, that's the person applying for a green card, is outside of the US, you are not going to have most of this, okay? And that is okay. USCIS knows this. If you are not living together in the same country, they do not expect you to have a joint bank account or a joint lease or properties together, but they do expect some pictures. They do expect proof of communication. So text messages are a great example of this, right? WhatsApp, you can actually download your WhatsApp messages, okay? Do not tell me that you can't do that, because I know you can. On iPhone and on Android, you can download your WhatsApp messages and use that as proof of your relationship. Now let's talk about the additional requirements, because you, once you know you are the spouse of a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, your marriage is legally recognized, you have documentation and are able to prove that your marriage is genuine. Now you want to look at additional things you have to keep in mind, right? You and your spouse must not be closely related by blood. This is very important because, again, first cousins are one thing in some states that are not allowed. If you are marrying like your niece or your nephew, even if it's allowed in the country where the marriage took place, in the majority of the US, it is not legal. So it is really important that as you are going through this process, like, you want to let your lawyer know if there is a close related relationship there, right? If you are closely related by blood to your spouse, you need to let your lawyer know that at the beginning, before you file any paperwork, because depending on what the law says in the state that you want to live in with your spouse, that is going to determine if you can even file the application to start with. So if you're not able to file the application because of the close relationship, then we're not even going to go through that step, right? Because you want to make sure that you meet all the requirements before you file any applications. It's easier to fix things beforehand than when you're already in the process. The next thing is that you need to prove that any prior marriages have been terminated. So if you have ever been married before, or your spouse has ever been married before, you too need to show that that prior marriage ended, okay? So either divorce, annulment, death of one of the spouses, right? That is what shows that the marriage ended, and you need to document this, okay? You can't just tell USCIS I'm divorced without actual divorce documents, and that divorce must be legal. All right? That divorce must be legal before you get married. There are some states, for example, Massachusetts, where even if the divorce was not final or legal when you got married to your second spouse, once that first divorce becomes final and legal, it fixes the fact that you were married to someone else before you married your current spouse. But we need to know these things before we file, All right, so you need to have that proof of termination. Something else that people do is that depending on the state you live in, for your divorce to be recognized, you have to be in the country or a resident of the country, or your ex-spouse has to be a resident of the country where you get a divorce. Some people may think just because you got married in Nigeria, for example, you have to get divorced in Nigeria. That is not the case, especially if the spouse that you're trying to divorce does not live in Nigeria anymore, okay? One of you has to live in that country for the marriage to be properly and legally ended. All right. If one of you is not living there, just go ahead and file your divorce in the US, please. Okay. Go ahead and file your divorce in the US. If you are here, it is okay. All right. If you meet the residency requirements for the state, you can file a divorce in the state. So please make sure that your divorce is legal and valid. Please. Next thing is you want to meet the income requirements. So for a marriage-based green card process, there is going to be an affidavit of support. Your spouse does have to show that they have the financial ability to support their household. So if it's just you and your spouse, that's a household of two. Okay, you and your spouse is a household of two. So you need to show that you have enough income to support your household. I have a whole video on my channel talking about affidavit of supports and how to meet the income requirements, even if you do not have a job. Okay, because sometimes people will call me and they're worried about starting the process because they don't have a job and they cannot show income. However, you may have a family or friend that's willing to sponsor your spouse. You may have assets, property, bank accounts, retirement accounts that you can leverage to show that you have enough assets to meet the income requirements. So it's really important that just because you're not working currently does not mean you cannot file for your spouse. You just have to make sure you meet the other requirements and have other options to meet that requirement. Now, talk about these ones because these are the big ones, right? Once you know that you have all the other stuff, you want to now look at your admissibility. This is for the non-US citizen or the non-permanent resident, right? The spouse that's trying to get their residency need to show that they are admissible to the US. You have to show that you are admissible to the US. This means that you do not have anything in your immigration background or a criminal background, a safety background that can make you inadmissible or not eligible to actually get a visa or a green card to the US. So just because you're married to a US citizen or a permanent resident, that alone does not make it possible for you to get a green card. You still have to show that you meet the requirements and are worthy of a visa or of a green card. So it's really important that as you're going through your green card journey, that this is a conversation you're having on the front end with your attorney. If you have ever applied for a visa to the US and were denied, I need to know that. Okay, I need to know that ahead of time because that may be something that can affect you later on. Okay, if you have ever misrepresented information on an application, we need to know that because you may need a waiver. And the more we know ahead of time, the more we can prepare. So it's really important that as you're going through your green card journey, especially if you are working with a lawyer, that you are telling them what is going on in your situation on the front end, because guess what's going to happen? USCIS, the embassy are going to find out. All right. If you have ever filed anything with USCIS that was not completely accurate, all right? Because I've had people that someone told them, oh, you can apply for this thing and you can get a work permit. And they apply for it, not knowing that they are lying on their application, saying that they've been in the US for longer than they have actually been in the US. So it's really, really, really important that I know that ahead of time so that we can plan for a waiver once that becomes an issue. The next thing is you must have admission or parole if you're filing in the US. So if you're filing for adjustment of status in the US, you have to be admitted or paroled. This is really important, and this is where people kind of mess up, because they think just because they're married to a US citizen, they can just apply to adjust their status or get a green card in the US. But if you were not admitted or paroled, you cannot adjust your status in the US, even if you are married to a US citizen. All right. That's really important. And then if you are married to a permanent resident, not only do you have to be admitted and paroled, you must show that you are in current valid status. So if you came in on a B1, B2 visa and your B1, B2 visa already expired, right? Your stay already expired. They gave you 6 months and you have stayed for 20 months. You are now a visa overstay. So your permanent resident spouse cannot file a green card application for you. They can file an I-130 for you, but they cannot file that actual green card application for you in the US until they become a US citizen. All right. And that is even if you were admitted and paroled. If you're not in current valid status when you file your green card application, you're not getting a green card until they become a US citizen. So this is why it's so important to have these conversations. I always want to know, how did you come to the US? Even if you came when you were 4 years old, I'm still going to ask you, what was the manner of entry? How did you come into the US? Did you have a visa? And if you have a visa, what type of visa? Because there's some types of visas that will not allow for you to actually adjust in the US, even if you are married to a US citizen. So if you had a crew member visa, which is the C1D visa, it was a visa, you had an admission. However, it's not an admission into the US that's good for adjustment of status. So we always want to know, how did you come into the US? What documentation did you have? Because that's going to tell me what we need to prepare for. Do we need to request your records of admission? Right? If you told me you came through the airport, but you don't have any documentation, we may have to request your records from the airline, from CBP. So the Customs and Border Patrol, which is the agency that handles people coming into the US, whether it's at the border or at the airport. We may need to request that entry and exit records for you. But the only way I know to do that is if you tell me that I need to do that. Right? If you give me enough information about yourself, if you're honest with me, then we can figure out a way to fix it. But if I don't know how you came into the US, my answer to you is always going to be, it depends, right? Can you get a green card? It depends on if you had admission or parole. It depends on what type of admission you had. Like, what type of visa did you come in under? It also depends on what type of parole you came in under. So it's really important that we're having this conversation, because before you even file one paperwork, we need to figure all this out and make sure you meet all the requirements. And if there's a requirement that you do not meet, then we can discuss, how can you still get a green card even though you don't meet this requirement? And that's the beauty of, what I do. That's why I love my job, because we get to literally take people from thinking they don't qualify for a green card and giving them a pathway to getting a green card. So that is what I have for you today. We are going to be doing the next one where I break down the recipe, right? The perfect recipe for a green card application based on marriage, right? We want to give you all the sauce. Right? We are not gatekeeping. We're going to give you all the sauce, because I want you to know what a recipe that can work looks like, what you need in order for a green card application to go through. Beyond everything else I've said, I just want to make it clear, you have to meet these requirements, whether you're in the US or outside of the US, because if you know ahead of time that there's a requirement here that you do not meet, guess what? We can talk about it. We can figure out a plan on how to still get you that green card, even though you do not meet all the requirements. For example, if you entered the US without inspection, right, you were not paroled and you were not admitted into the US, and you're married to a US citizen or a permanent resident, you are still physically in the US, we may be able to apply for a waiver to waive the fact that you entered without inspection. And with the new parole program that's announced by the Biden administration, if you have been in the US for 10 years and married to a US citizen as of June 2024, guess what? You may qualify for that parole, and you can go from entering without inspection to now paroled, and that US citizen spouse can file for you to get a green card. So that's why I say it is important that we go through all the requirements, make sure you meet all of them. And if you do not, have a plan of how we're going to fix that or how we're going to move forward to make sure that you still are able to get a green card. Even if it takes longer, we can still get you to that goal. We just need to know what that process is going to look like for you. If you would like to find out if you qualify for a marriage-based green card, and we go through all these criteria, make sure you meet them, go ahead and schedule a strategy session with me. It is a free 15-minute time with me to go through your situation and figure out what you qualify for, how we can help you. If there are issues, how we can go about fixing those issues to make sure that you still are able to qualify and get your green card. If you want to schedule that strategy session, you can do that by going to my website, lilylegal.com, clicking on contact us, and picking a date and time that works best for you for us to chat about your immigration situation. Or you can call my office at 508-443-1788. Thank you again for joining me. And just know, the next part in this series is going to be the perfect marriage-based green card application recipe, okay? I'm going to be breaking down the recipe I use for my clients, so stick around for that.